Throughout your whole life, you have been giving up your power without even realizing it. Each time you responded to someone who didn't deserve it. Every time you tried to explain yourself to someone who would never get it. Every time you allow someone to disturb your tranquility in order to prove something that was never worth proving. It was not a sign of weakness. It seemed warranted. It seemed essential. However, it taught you to live at the mercy of others, gradually and covertly. Most people still don't understand what the Stoics did. The real battle is never out there, Marcus Aurelius told himself. It's within, not dictating what other people say. Overcoming the urge to respond at all, rather than clearing up every mistake. Because something changes the instant you are no longer required to answer, defend, or explain. You grow more difficult to manage, tougher to reach, and harder to shake. Furthermore, respect is not demanded by such a presence. It produces it silently, effortlessly, and silently. It's the type of control that already exists and doesn't need to show itself. Until you slow down enough to truly perceive it, you are unaware of how much of your life is governed by response. It begins modestly. Someone says something a little strange, just enough to cause tension, nothing overt. All of a sudden, your thinking is no longer your own. It begins repeatedly recreating the scene. You examine tone. You wonder about intent. You construct answers that you wish you had spoken. You hone them. You practice them. And you're gone. Music. When all this is going on, you are no longer there. You're stuck in a situation that has already finished. The majority of individuals never account for the expense. Reaction takes your consciousness in addition to altering the situation. And control comes when you lose consciousness. Music. Even if you're not aware of it yet, this is where the change starts. Because control was never about proving points or controlling circumstances. It has to do with maintaining your inner state. Something shifts the instant someone else's comments influence your feelings. Even if you appear calm on the outside, you have already adapted to them on the inside. It feels legitimate, which is an odd aspect. In actuality, you're behaving on terms you didn't pick, even though it feels like you're standing your ground and doing the right thing. You're entering a dynamic that wasn't created for you, and you reinforce a pattern each time that occurs, even in little ways. A pattern in which your tranquility might be broken at any time. Music eventually loses that pattern. You cease to doubt it. You begin to believe that this is the way life is. You answer what people say. You respond to challenges from others. You explain that others, music, don't comprehend you. You've created a mechanism where your energy is continuously drawn forth without realizing it. You are focusing on things that don't merit your attention. Your tranquility becomes contingent, and the majority of people stay there. They never take a step back far enough to see it properly, not because they prefer it. They fail to see that the disruption, music, is not a result of the circumstances. It stems from the way they interact with it. The Stoics had a different perspective on this. They realized that not every scenario calls for your engagement, that not every statement needs to be addressed, that not everything merits a reaction, and, above all, that you have control over the space between what occurs and how you react. It's always there, but it's a tiny area that's easy to overlook. Your freedom is contained inside that area. Most people move too quickly to see it, which is the issue. Before they consider, they act. Before making a decision, they converse. And that area vanishes. However, something happens when you even slightly slow down. Prior to the action, you begin to notice the impulse. Before the emotion takes hold, you may sense it developing. You have an option at that very moment. Everything starts to change after that decision. You don't need to respond. There's no need to explain. You don't have to interact with every situation that arises. And you start taking something back when you exercise that decision, even in tiny ways. Your focus sharpened. Your energy becomes more steady. You are no longer drawn into every circumstance. You're choosing which ones are worthy of you, and your movement is altered by that selectivity. You're not trying to evade life. You're improving your participation in it. Your viewpoint begins to change at the same moment. You start to realize that the majority of what others say or do isn't truly about you. It is influenced by their own experiences, constraints, and worldview. And the impulse to take things personally begins to wane once you realize that. There's less pressure on you to answer. You don't feel as compelled to defend or correct. You begin to see that it's not an issue if it isn't understood by everyone. It's typical. Furthermore, pursuing that understanding frequently results in greater expenses than benefits. Additionally, your usage of quiet has changed. Silence used to seem like a sign of weakness, something you sank into when you were at a loss for words. However, it is now deliberate. You decide on it. Additionally, most individuals find it uncomfortable to choose quiet in situations where a response is anticipated. Uncertainty. There's no distinct response, no emotional indication, no input. The dynamic is altered by that absence, since they are now thinking about you rather than you. It's not because you're attempting to manipulate people, but rather because you failed to meet their expectations. However, this does not imply distancing oneself from everything. The majority of individuals misinterpret the concept at that point. You're picky, yet you're still there, conscious and involved. You don't freely focus your attention. You don't react right away. You decide when to speak, when to intervene, and when to retreat. Music and value is produced by such selectivity, because people seldom appreciate what is constantly accessible. However, intentionality, measurement, and control are important. It produces an alternative music of presence that is self-evident. And something more profound starts to emerge as you carry on in this manner. You're not only staying away from negativity, your standards are being redefined. You reinforce a silent barrier each time you choose to overlook something that doesn't merit you. You remind yourself that not everything is worthwhile, and eventually you start to move in accordance with that norm. You don't need to consider it. You sense it. You know what suits you and what doesn't. And music, you respond appropriately, without hesitation or justification. Discipline can help with it, due to the fact that your mind will continue to attempt to drag you back into previous behaviors. It will still force you to respond, defend, and demonstrate. However, you are now aware of it. Before it takes control, you can see the trigger. You know where it's coming from, and you watch it rather than follow it. Its control is weakened by that knowledge. It separates you from the response. And music gives you stability in that distance. Instead of repressing feelings, try not to let them control you. Music. You gradually come to the point where you don't feel the need to take action in every circumstance. You don't have to answer every question. You shouldn't pay heed to every comment. You don't have to become involved in every quarrel. And something potent, music, occurs in that restriction. You save energy. You're constructing, you're concentrating, and you're moving forward uninterrupted, while others are preoccupied with responding, explaining, and wearing themselves out. That's the silent benefit of music. Just control. No distractions or noise. Don't allow this way of thinking go away like everything else if it speaks to you. Continue with it. Music expands upon it. And music should think about subscribing if you're serious about heading in this direction. Not as a habit, but as a choice, a pledge, to think more clearly, act less impulsively, and lead a more controlled life than you did the day before. It's a small adjustment, but it makes all the difference, since you're now doing more than simply talking. You're looking for approval. You're attempting to change someone else's opinion of you in the hopes that they would react differently if they see you clearly. Music. You've given them control over your feeling of clarity by doing that. You've made their comprehension a prerequisite for your tranquility. The unbalance starts there, because in actuality, people don't interpret you objectively. Music. They see you through their own prism, which is influenced by their expectations, fears, experiences, and beliefs. They see more than just you when it comes to music. You've sifted through everything they've already been. Music. And that has significant implications. Alignment cannot be ensured by any amount of explanation. You are able to pick your words well. You may make your intentions clear. 10 various methods exist for you to repeat yourself, and they can still fail to see what you're attempting to convey. It's not that you didn't explain, but rather that their viewpoint isn't designed to accept it. Most folks get stopped at this point. They believe the gap can be closed with additional work, that it will ultimately make sense if they simply communicate it more effectively, carefully, and clearly. However, it frequently time. Not dramatically, but in music, in a gradual, exhausting manner that tires you out without your awareness. You begin to anticipate miscommunications before they occur. You mentally practice explanations. Music. Instead of speaking freely, you start music speaking defensively because you overthink your words, tone, and timing. You're attempting to avoid being misinterpreted, not because you're being attacked. Music. That is the extent to which this tendency may become ingrained. It alters not just your communication style, but also your way of thinking. Additionally, there is a hidden consequence that is simple to ignore. The more you explain yourself needlessly, the more you educate others about the need of doing so, and you raise the expectation that all of your choices, actions, and ideas must be justified. Furthermore, it is hard to abandon that expectation after it has been set, because music and quiet now seem like evasion. Something seems to be lacking. In actuality, though, silence is frequently the most obvious barrier you can establish. It asserts that not everyone is entitled to your logic, and that not everything, music, needs to be explained. At this point, an alternative viewpoint starts to emerge. You start concentrating on how you view yourself rather than attempting to manage how other people perceive you. Music. You start to realize that external agreement is not the source of clarity. Internal alignment is the source of it. The urge to explain begins to wane when you know what you meant, when you comprehend your goals, and when you are rooted in your own logic. It's not that you don't care, but rather that you can feel solid without relying on someone else's perspective. This change is aptly captured in a passage from Epictetus. Music. What important is how you respond to it, not what occurs to you. Music. And most people's first response when they are misinterpreted is an explanation. However, what if restraint is the more restrained reaction? What if being able to recognize when enough has been spoken is more powerful than speaking more? At that point, the equilibrium starts to reappear. You are no longer seeking comprehension. When it's worthwhile to pursue, it is up to you. This does not imply that you become aloof or cease to communicate. It implies that your conversation becomes deliberate. You stop explaining out of reflex when it provides value. When music illuminates something that truly matters, and when the other person is genuinely receptive to understanding. You quit doing it because it makes you uncomfortable, because you're afraid of being perceived negatively, and because you have to correct every misunderstanding. And something significant occurs throughout that change. You get your energy back. Additionally, music has a deeper level. You start to notice how frequently people project their own presumptions onto you when you stop over-explaining. Music. You observe how readily motives are given, how fast conclusions are drawn, and occasionally, how little work is put into truly understanding. Rather of attempting to rectify each and every one of those predictions, you choose to ignore them. It's not because they're correct, but rather because you can't control them. Space is created by that realization. Space to behave intentionally, think clearly, and move without continuously changing who you are to suit the viewpoint of others. It relieves a burden that most people bear without being aware of it. Your conversations begin to seem different, lighter, more straightforward, and simpler after the strain has subsided. Your sense of self stabilizes at the same moment. It is no longer influenced by how well you are understood by others. It is based on your level of self-awareness. You become less defensive, less reactive, and less likely to overcorrect as a result of that steadiness. Since you don't depend on that perception to define who you are, you don't feel the same pressure to be perceived in a particular manner. At this point, the relationship to control becomes evident once more. Explanation may subtly take power away from you, just like response does. Not overtly, but in a subtle, continuous interchange, where your energy is continuously focused outward in an attempt to control how you are viewed. You draw that energy back within when you break free from that tendency and cease explaining by default. Rather than attempting to correct someone else's understanding, you utilize it to improve your own clarity. This develops into a habit over time. You take a moment to explain. You consider if the other person is even able to comprehend, whether it is required, and whether it contributes anything. And you let it go if the response is negative. You don't fill the void, you don't rectify the story, and you don't look for a solution where none exists. You don't become less expressive because of that restriction. You get more accurate as a result. Because your comments aren't employed to justify every detail, they have greater weight. When it matters, they are utilized. They land differently as a result. People pay greater attention when you intentionally speak less than when you say more. Ultimately, the change is straightforward, yet challenging. You start managing how you react to being understood, instead of attempting to control how other people perceive you. You focus on being clear inside yourself and let go of the urge to be completely understood by everyone. And if it becomes your cornerstone, miscommunication no longer has the ability to bother you. Moments that often draw you in can be handled in a different way. It doesn't appear dramatic. It doesn't sound loud. In fact, it feels nearly weird at first. Someone attempts to agitate you, whether with a remark, tone, or anything so subtle that only you notice it, and you hesitate rather than respond as you usually would. You don't answer. You don't correct them with music. Nothing on your face indicates that they have reached you. You just don't fuel the moment. You just let it go. The entire dynamic is altered by the quiet at that precise time. The majority of individuals find such absence to be uncomfortable. Uncertainty. The other person is left with their own interpretation in the absence of a response, an emotional indication, or explicit input. They begin to wonder what had just transpired. Did it touch down? Did it really matter? Was it deliberately disregarded? Their minds attempt to fill the void left by that lack of clarity. Additionally, the more they consider it, the more their focus shifts from you to their own presumptions. Silence exerts a form of psychological pressure through absence rather than force. People are accustomed to receiving criticism. They use it to negotiate social situations. A response lets them know where they stand, if they went too far, and whether they were successful in eliciting a response. They lose their frame of reference in the absence of that input. They become less confident in the encounter as a result of that ambiguity. The way the situation plays out is no longer within their control. This is made much more powerful by the fact that it just demands restraint. You're not attempting to outwit anyone. Music. Your reaction isn't flawless. All you're doing is deciding not to put your energy into something that doesn't merit it. And when that decision is made again, it creates a new type of presence. One that is difficult to draw into pointless conversations. One that doesn't respond impulsively. One that doesn't waver under pressure. When you practice this type of silence, something significant is also taking place on the inside. You're improving your capacity to tolerate discomfort without taking action. Because the impulse to react doesn't go away right away. It continues to urge you to speak out, make corrections, and participate. However, you show yourself that it doesn't rule you when you fight that temptation, even for a moment. And that insight fosters confidence, the quiet sort that doesn't need to be flaunted, not the loud kind. This alters your perception of encounters over time. Things that were formerly stressful or exhausting begin to feel neutral. Remarks that would have lingered in your mind for hours become less significant. You start to see how much of your prior tension was caused by your reaction to what was said, rather than what was stated. And the desire to respond begins to wane as that becomes evident. Score. It doesn't seem essential anymore. There is a sentence that perfectly expresses this concept. A guy who is not in control of himself is not free. In this sense, freedom isn't about dictating to people or molding every encounter to your preferences. Music. It's about controlling your own reactions, even when circumstances tempt you to give in. One of the easiest ways to develop such control is to stay silent. It keeps the problem from controlling you, not because it avoids it,